I didn't think the day would begin with heartbreak. In fact, when I woke up that morning, I felt hopeful. It had been a long time since I'd felt that way. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the skirt of the blue dress I'd ironed the night before. It wasn't new, but it was my favorite. Simple, elegant, and the same color my granddaughter Lily used to say reminded her of summer skies. I pinned on my silver brooch, the one my late husband bought me years ago. As I fastened it, I whispered a small prayer that he could see our family today, that he could watch Lily walk down the aisle. I took one last look around my house before leaving. It felt quiet, too quiet. Most days that kind of silence settles into my bones, but that morning, I didn't mind it. I was going to my granddaughter's wedding. I was going to see my son smile. I was going to watch the next generation of our family begin. I held on to that thought the whole drive there. When I arrived at the venue, I sat in my car for a moment, watching guests walk past me in their bright dresses and polished shoes. For a second, I felt like my younger self, the one who used to host Sunday dinners, the one whose house was full of noise and toys and laughter. I stepped out slowly, clutching the small envelope I'd prepared for Lily, a handwritten note, and a little necklace I'd saved just for her. As I approached the entrance, the music drifted out through the open doors, soft violins, laughter, the hum of excitement. At the check-in table, I said my name. I was smiling. I remember that clearly. I was smiling. But the young woman searching the list wasn't. She checked once, twice, 3 times. Her expression changed each time, more tight, more cautious. "I'm sorry," she said. "You're not on the list." For a moment I didn't understand. I thought maybe she was joking, or reading it wrong, or looking at the wrong page. I felt something inside me crack, small at first, like a tiny fracture, but deep. My hands shook around Lily's envelope. My mouth went dry. I couldn't get any words out. I looked at my son, really looked at him, trying to understand if this was a misunderstanding or a punishment, or something I had done without realizing. But his expression told me nothing, or maybe it told me everything. People were starting to look, whispers, side glances, the kind of moment you never forget, because it stings long after it's over. So I nodded, so he wouldn't see my tears, and I walked away, slowly, holding my purse against my chest, like a shield. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel and stared at the venue doors. The doors where my family had just entered without me, until my vision blurred. I drove home in silence. But the story, my story, didn't end there. Because when I got home, just hours later, I learned the truth, and it wasn't the truth I expected. When I got home from the wedding venue, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in my parked car for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but my mind was far, far away, swimming through years of memories, searching for the moment things began to shift between my son and me. Because the truth is, it wasn't always like this. There was a time when my son, Daniel, would run into my arms whenever I walked through the door. A time when he'd slip his small hand into mine without being asked. A time when he would sit at the kitchen table every afternoon after school, telling me about his day while I chopped vegetables for dinner. Back then, our home felt warm, alive, full of the kind of noise you don't appreciate until it disappears. His father, my husband, was the quiet type, a gentle man with a soft voice and a way of looking at you that made you feel understood without having to say a word. But life has a way of testing even the strongest families. When Daniel was 12, my husband's health began to fail. Slowly at first, little things, then suddenly, all at once. Hospitals, medications, sleepless nights, bills stacked on the dining table. I became 2 people at once, a caregiver and a mother, trying to raise a young boy whose world was unraveling. I did everything I could, but grief changes people, especially children. When my husband passed, I remember the exact moment I told Daniel. He was sitting on the couch, legs pulled to his chest, hugging the family dog. I knelt beside him and whispered the words I prayed I'd never have to say. He didn't cry, he didn't scream, he just stared at me with this empty look, as if a door inside him had quietly closed. From that day on, something between us shifted. He spoke less. He withdrew. He grew up faster than he should have. And I did what mothers do. I pushed forward. I worked extra shifts. I kept food on the table. I made sure he finished school, went to college, built a life for himself. But somewhere in that rush, while I was trying to be strong for both of us, I didn't see how much he was changing. Years later, when he had a family of his own, I noticed how polite, almost distant, his interactions with me became. Holidays grew quieter, phone calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. Whenever I asked if something was wrong, he would smile tightly and say, "No, Mom, everything's fine." But it didn't feel fine. A mother knows, even when she pretends not to. The first real sign of trouble came the year Lily was born. I remember the day I first held her, this tiny, warm little bundle with her father's eyes and her mother's smile. I felt like I was holding a piece of hope, but even then, I noticed Daniel watching me closely, like he was waiting for me to make a mistake, as if I were fragile, or perhaps dangerous. I brushed it off at the time. New parents worry about everything. I told myself it was normal, but the distance, it grew. Small disagreements, misunderstandings, moments that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did, like the time I offered to watch Lily so they could rest. His wife agreed, but Daniel hesitated, as though my help came with some hidden cost. Or the time I gave Lily a family keepsake, a bracelet that had belonged to my grandmother. It was meant as a gesture of love, but Daniel took it from Lily's wrist and returned it to me, saying, "She's too young. We'll decide when she gets things like this." I told myself not to read into it, not to take it personally, but in my heart, I knew something was wrong, something he wasn't saying, and yet I kept trying. Birthdays, graduations, little moments of effort that I hoped would bring us closer again. But the wall between us only seemed to grow higher. Then came the wedding announcement. Except I didn't hear it from my son. I didn't receive a call, or a letter, or an invitation. I heard it from a neighbor, a kind, chatty woman who mentioned it while we were pulling weeds in our yards. "Oh, your granddaughter must be so excited," she said. "So much planning." I saw the venue online, beautiful place. I smiled and nodded, pretending I already knew, pretending everything was normal, pretending my heart didn't drop straight into my stomach. I went home that day, sat at my kitchen table, and waited for my phone to ring. It didn't. Not that day, not the next, not the week after. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just a delay, that invitations were being sent later, that I was overthinking. After all, I was family. Why would my own son exclude me? But as the date approached, a quiet fear settled into my chest, a fear I refused to speak aloud. And so when the morning came, I dressed up anyway. I told myself that maybe the invitation had been lost in the mail, or maybe my son had planned to call me, but got busy. I drove there with hope in my heart, but hope can be a painful thing, because standing at that table, being told my name wasn't on the list, watching my son look at me with embarrassment instead of love, it confirmed what I had been refusing to see for years. There was history between us. History he had never spoken, wounds I didn't know I'd caused, assumptions I didn't know he'd made, and silence, far too much silence. But that day, When I returned home, still trembling from the humiliation, I discovered something that changed everything, something that explained the distance, and something that would force me to confront a past I thought I had survived. When I finally walked into my house that afternoon, I didn't take off my shoes. I didn't remove my brooch. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just stood there in the middle of my quiet living room, feeling like a guest in my own life, like I had accidentally walked into a version of my world where I no longer belonged. I laid Lily's envelope on the kitchen table. It looked so small sitting there, almost fragile, a symbol of all the love I still carried and all the places it no longer seemed welcome. After a while, I made myself a cup of tea, though I don't remember drinking it. I just needed something warm to hold, because I was shaking the way a person shakes after bad news or after a shock they don't yet understand. At some point, I walked to the mailbox. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or maybe hope, the tiny, foolish kind that lingers even when your heart knows better. Inside the mailbox was a stack of envelopes, bills, catalogs, and one thick white envelope addressed to me in my granddaughter's handwriting. My breath caught. For a moment, I felt the world tilt. This time, not from humiliation but from disbelief. I took the envelope inside, my fingers trembling as I slid a nail beneath the flap. Inside was the wedding invitation, cream-colored, elegant, with gold lettering and Lily's smiling engagement photo on the back. The date and time were printed clearly. The same date, the same time, the same event I had just been told I didn't belong at. I turned the envelope over, expecting a postmark, a date to tell me when it had been sent, but there was no stamp, no postal markings at all. It had never gone through the mail. It had been delivered by hand. Someone had placed it directly in my mailbox, without knocking on the door, without calling out my name, without letting me know it was there. I stood in my kitchen holding that envelope, trying to understand the timeline, the intentions, the disconnect. Why would my name not be on the guest list when the invitation had clearly been addressed to me? Why had no one followed up when I didn't RSVP? No call, no text, not even a question. Then something even stranger occurred to me. I hadn't seen this envelope yesterday, or the day before. I check my mailbox every morning out of habit. There had been nothing. It must have been dropped off today, sometime between when I left for the wedding and when I came home in tears. My chest tightened. Was this a mistake, a miscommunication, or something far more deliberate? I sat down with the envelope, looking at the handwriting over and over. It was Lily's. Yes, but the way it was placed in the mailbox, with the face turned downward, as if someone wanted it hidden, didn't feel like her. I ran my fingers over the sealed flap again. It hadn't been opened or tampered with. It had simply been delivered too late, or perhaps delivered late on purpose. A memory suddenly flashed through my mind. A conversation months earlier where Lily mentioned wanting to make the invitations herself. "Grandma, I'll bring yours personally," she had said, smiling brightly. And she would have. She was that kind of girl, thoughtful, responsible, loving, which meant she hadn't brought this. Someone else had. Someone who didn't want me at that wedding but needed it to look, on paper at least, as though I had been invited. The more I stared at that envelope, the more the edges of the truth began to form. A truth I wasn't ready to face, but could no longer avoid. Someone had intervened. Someone had decided when I would receive that invitation. Someone had kept my name off the guest list. Someone had orchestrated everything so that it appeared as though I was the one who ignored the invitation and simply didn't show up. And in my heart, I knew exactly who would benefit from a story like that. my son, but I still couldn't understand why. Why would he go to such lengths? Why would he hide an invitation meant for me? Why would he put me in a position where I'd be humiliated in front of strangers on one of the most important days of our family's life? I sat with those questions for a long time until the tea in my cup had gone cold and the sunlight outside had turned orange. But the universe has a strange way of revealing what you need to know when you need to know it. Because just as I set the envelope down, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my entire world shifted again, more than it had at the venue, more than it had at the mailbox. Because the message was the beginning of a truth I had never expected, and it came from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I woke up early that morning, long before the sun fully rose. Even though I told myself I wasn't excited, my body betrayed me. My hands trembled as I buttoned my blouse, smoothing the fabric over my hips, trying to look presentable, not extravagant, not attention-seeking, just a grandmother trying to show up for her granddaughter's big day. I kept replaying the conversations in my head, the polite silence from my son, the vague answers, the strange tension. But I refused to believe he would ever deliberately leave me out of something so important. It's a wedding, I whispered to myself. Families show up. That's what families do. I packed a small purse, double-checked that the little envelope containing my gift money was inside, and took a final glance in the mirror. I didn't look like a woman going into a fight. I looked like a mother who still held hope. Arriving at the venue, the church was beautiful, decorated with white roses and gold ribbon that shimmered under the morning sun. Guests were already gathering, greeting each other, taking pictures. I smiled politely as I walked in, even though I recognized almost no one. The people I did recognize, well, they looked at me with a mixture of surprise and discomfort, not unkind, but unsure. You know that feeling you get when you enter a room and instantly sense you shouldn't be there. It was like stepping into cold water. Still, I kept my head high. I made my way toward the entrance, adjusting my shawl, preparing to step inside the church, when a young man, barely in his 20s, held up a clipboard and blocked my path. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said. "Can I have your name?" I smiled, thinking nothing of it. "Yes, of course. I'm Margaret Turner, grandmother of the bride." He scanned the list, then scanned it again, and again. Then his eyebrows pulled together. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the list." The embarrassment for a moment, I actually laughed. A soft, confused laugh. "There must be a mistake," I said. "My son is Daniel Turner, the father of the bride. I'm her grandmother." He bit his lip, uncomfortable. "I understand, ma'am, but only invited guests can enter." The couple was firm about keeping the list controlled. I felt heat rising in my chest. Not anger yet, just humiliation. People were watching. Two women whispered behind me. Someone pretended not to stare. I tried again. Please check one more time." He checked, shook his head, and said the words I will never forget. "Ma'am, you're not on the list." My son shows up. Just then, I saw Daniel approaching. Relief washed through me. Finally, he would fix this. But he didn't look surprised to see me standing outside. He didn't look confused either. He looked tense. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "I'm here for my granddaughter's wedding." He glanced at the usher, then back at me. "Mom, we talked about this." "No, you talked around it," I said, trying not to cry. "Why am I not on the list, Daniel?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was the problem. "Mom, this day is about Lily. She wanted a small ceremony, and with everything that has happened between us, Everything that happened, I repeated. Daniel, I haven't done anything to you. I've been trying. I've apologized for things I don't even understand. I've tried to reach out. How can I be unwelcome at my own granddaughter's wedding? He looked away, and when he finally spoke, his words came out cold. Mom, it's better if you go home. The painful reality, at that moment, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. It cracked quietly, like a thin sheet of ice breaking underfoot. I looked into my son's eyes, searching for the little boy I raised, the child who used to run into my arms after school, the young man I supported through heartbreak, mistakes, and struggles. But he wasn't there. The man standing in front of me was a stranger, telling me I didn't belong. I swallowed hard. My voice trembled. So this is how our family ends, I whispered, with a clipboard and a locked door. He said nothing, not a word. When I realized he wouldn't fight for me, not even a little, I stepped back. I slowly turned around, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the heavy feeling in my chest, and I walked away from my granddaughter's wedding. Each step felt heavier than the last. Leaving the venue, when I reached the parking lot, I stopped. I looked back at the church, the stained glass windows glowing, the flowers blowing in the breeze, the laughter spilling out as people took their seats. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it became one of the most painful moments I've ever endured as a mother. I opened my car door, sat down, and let the tears fall, quietly, without restraint. But as I sat there, something inside me shifted, and that shift would change everything that happened next. The drive home felt longer than it ever had before. Even though the wedding venue was only 20 minutes away, the road stretched endlessly in front of me, like a reminder of how far my family had drifted. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want music. I didn't want noise. I didn't want noise. I wanted answers, and none were coming. I kept replaying the moment, the usher's hesitation, the whispering guests, Daniel's expression, so calm, so detached. How did we get here? When did I become someone my own son could so easily dismiss? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was already starting to set. I sat there for a long moment, before I even reached for the door handle, letting the silence of my empty house swallow me whole. The house felt colder than usual. Isn't it strange how buildings can sense your mood? The air felt heavier, the rooms darker, like they were reflecting the ache in my chest. I slipped off my shoes, hung up my shawl, and walked into the living room, the one place that normally gives me comfort. My photos were on the shelves, smiling versions of the family I used to have. Birthdays, Christmas, my granddaughter as a toddler, frosting on her cheeks, sitting in my lap. I stopped in front of that picture. My fingers traced her tiny face. How did we get here, sweetheart? I whispered. You used to call me your second mom. My voice cracked, and for the first time in a very long while, I cried openly. Not the kind of cry you can hide by turning away or dabbing at the corners of your eyes. No, this was the deep, chest-aching sob of someone grieving a living person. After that, time blurred. I made tea. I didn't drink it. I sat on the couch. I forgot to turn on the lights. It was grief, but not the kind that comes from death. It was the grief of being erased. I kept telling myself not to take it personally, that maybe there was an explanation, that maybe Lily didn't even know what was happening. But then the other voice, the harsher voice, whispered, if they wanted you there, you would have been on the list. That voice hurt more than anything Daniel said to me. I spent hours thinking, tracing back memories, looking for a moment, a misstep, something I said or did that could justify being shut out like this. But there was nothing, no dramatic fight, no betrayal, no incident that could explain such cruelty. Yes, Daniel and I drifted apart after my husband died. Yes, I struggled with grief. Maybe I leaned too heavily on him at times, but I never stopped being his mother, never stopped trying. And yet, today he made it painfully clear. I was no longer part of his picture. As the hours passed, my sadness slowly warmed into something else. Not rage, not spite, just indignation. Because parents aren't perfect, but we are human. We sacrifice, we show up, we love, sometimes in flawed ways, but always deeply. And to be told, you're not on the list, Mom. After everything I did, after everything I gave, it wasn't just cruel, it was disrespectful. Something inside me stiffened, a tiny thread of strength pulling taut. I may not be on your list, I whispered into the quiet room, but I am still your mother. I kept my phone beside me all night, just in case Daniel called, just in case someone noticed I wasn't at the ceremony, just in case Lily asked where I'd been. But the phone stayed silent. No call, no apology, no curiosity, nothing. That silence, that was its own kind of answer. Sometime around midnight, I wiped my face and stood up. My knees ached, my back hurt, and my heart felt bruised, but I stood anyway. I turned on the lamp, straightened the pillows, took a breath, and in that stillness, something came to me, soft, quiet, but clear. You cannot mourn people who are still alive unless you're ready to let them go. I didn't know what that meant yet. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew the wedding wasn't just a rejection. It was a turning point, a moment that would force me to see the truth, whether I liked it or not, and that truth would lead to the unexpected discovery that changed everything. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow, that kind of emptiness that settles behind your ribs and makes everything feel heavier, even getting out of bed. I moved slowly around the house, making coffee. I barely tasted, opening curtains I didn't really care to open. I tried to distract myself, watching the news, flipping through a magazine, anything to avoid thinking about the wedding. But pain has a way of lingering. It sits with you, follows you from room to room, and that morning, it followed me all the way to the mailbox. Follows you to the mailbox. When I opened the mailbox, I noticed something odd, a small cream-colored envelope tucked between my usual bills and advertisements. No return address, just my name written neatly on the front. My heart fluttered, not with hope, more like recognition. The handwriting was familiar, my granddaughter's. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, my fingers trembling. A letter on the day after the wedding. Why? What did she want to say? I carried the envelope inside, like it contained something fragile. And maybe it did. I sat at my kitchen table, took a deep breath, and gently tore the seal open. Inside was a single folded sheet of stationery. I unfolded it, and as soon as I read the first line, my breath caught in my throat. Grandma, if you're reading this, it means you weren't at the wedding, and I need you to know why. My eyes scanned the letter, each sentence cutting deeper than the one before. Grandma, I never wanted you to be excluded. I never agreed to it. I told my dad that you should be there, that you needed to be there, but he said you would cause stress, that you would make the day about you, that you would cry and make him uncomfortable. I felt tears prick my eyes. Me, making things about me. I had spent my entire life trying not to be a burden. I kept reading. I don't believe any of that. I love you. I wanted you there, but Dad insisted. He told me, she's not coming, and that's final. I even asked him if he told you not to come. He said he had. My hands shook. He lied. He didn't just forget to invite me. He didn't just overlook me. He intentionally kept me away, and then told his daughter that I didn't want to come. The next part of the letter felt like a punch to the chest. Grandma, Dad told me something else, something about your will, about how you're planning to leave the house to Aunt Claire. My breath stopped. So that was it. A disagreement over my will. Something I only discussed once years ago with both of my children because Claire had been caring for me after my surgery. But apparently, Daniel had never accepted it. He told me, the letter continued, that you picked your favorite child a long time ago and that he was done trying to compete for your approval. I pressed the letter to my chest as tears streamed down my cheeks. All this heartbreak, all this distance, all this resentment, because of a misunderstanding, because of pride, because my son felt replaced, overshadowed, unloved. None of it was true, none of it. But he had built an entire story in his mind, and it had turned me into a villain. The letter continued, Grandma, I need you to know I wanted you at my wedding. I asked for you. I cried when you weren't there. I even stepped out during the reception to look for you. My hand covered my mouth as I read. My granddaughter, my sweet girl, she looked for me. She wanted me there. The pain I felt that morning, the humiliation outside the church, all of it was because of Daniel, not her. And she had suffered too. At the bottom, her handwriting grew softer, shakier. I don't know what happened between you and Dad, but I want you in my life. Please don't give up on me. I love you, always. That was the moment I broke. Not the quiet kind of crying I did the night before, but a deep, shaking, releasing sob that came from years of misunderstanding, distance, and unspoken hurt. My granddaughter loved me. She didn't shut me out. She didn't abandon me. This wasn't her doing. This wasn't her choice. This was my son, my own child. By the time I finally folded the letter back into its envelope, I sat there in silence, staring at nothing. The truth was heavier than the pain. Daniel wasn't acting out of cruelty, not entirely. He was acting from old wounds. Wounds I didn't know he carried. Wounds he never shared. But the consequences, they were devastating. He had punished me for a story he told himself, and in trying to protect himself, he damaged the entire family. I wiped my eyes. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. I knew what I had to do next, for myself, for Lily, and even for Daniel, because truths like these don't stay buried. They come to the surface. They demand to be addressed. And now, it was time to confront the past and the son who shut me out. I sat with my granddaughter's letter for a long time, not reading it, just holding it, letting the weight of the words settle into my bones. Truth can be a strange thing. Sometimes it breaks you. Other times, it gives you the strength to stand back up. That morning, it did both. I felt the sting of betrayal, the kind that only comes from someone you once held as a baby. But beneath that pain was something surprisingly steady, a sense of direction. For the first time in years, I saw the whole picture clearly. Not the one my son painted in his anger, not the one I blamed myself for in my confusion, but the truth. And the truth was simple, even if it hurt. My son was wounded, and wounded people wound others. But I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. And I certainly wasn't done being a mother or a grandmother. And that clarity, that new understanding became the turning point. I stood slowly from the kitchen table, letter pressed to my chest. I wasn't the same woman who drove home crying from the wedding. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't questioning my worth or replaying the humiliation. I felt anchored. My pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Instead of guilt, there was certainty. Instead of helplessness, a quiet resolve. And instead of allowing my son's assumptions to shape my life, I decided to shape my own story. I walked to my bedroom, opened my wardrobe, and took out an old wooden box, the one I kept letters, photos, and little pieces of my children's lives in. Inside were drawings Daniel made when he was 5, Mother's Day cards he wrote as a teenager, photos of us laughing on the beach, moments that felt distant, but still precious. I spread them out on the bed, and as the memories flooded in, something softened inside me. Because the truth is, love doesn't disappear. It just gets buried under years of miscommunication and hurt feelings. And right there, looking at those memories, I made a choice to stop letting this silence define us, to stop tiptoeing around his resentment, to confront the problem, not in anger, but in truth. With shaky hands, I picked up my phone, not to call him. I wasn't ready for that. He wasn't ready either, but I sent a message, not pleading, not apologizing for things I didn't do, not begging for acceptance. Just a few honest words. Daniel, I received a letter from Lily. I think there are things we need to discuss, calmly and truthfully. I'm here when you're ready. I stared at the screen before hitting send. Then, with a deep breath, I placed the phone down. I wasn't expecting a reply. Healing doesn't start with the other person. It starts with acknowledging your own truth. And I had finally done that. I didn't hear anything for hours. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall and the faint hum of the refrigerator. But then, my phone buzzed. My heart skipped. It was my granddaughter. Not a text, a call. I answered quickly, my voice trembling. Hello? Her voice was soft, emotional, but full of love. Grandma, I heard what happened yesterday. I am so sorry. Can I come over? That was it. That was the turning point. Not the letter, not the realization, not even finding the courage to reach out. It was that moment, hearing her voice, hearing her want me, hearing the bond still alive between us, that pulled me out of the darkness completely. I felt my shoulders relax, the heaviness in my chest lift just a little. Yes, sweetheart, I whispered, come home, because despite everything that had happened, a bridge still remained, and it was time to start rebuilding it. I waited nervously by the door, the soft hum of the house around me. My hands fidgeted with the edge of my shawl, the same one I wore to the wedding, still carrying the faint scent of flowers. Then I heard the knock. I opened the door, and there she was, my granddaughter, Lily. Her eyes were bright but watery, her small hands clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked herself. Grandma, she whispered, almost breathless, can we just sit for a minute? I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We moved to the living room, sat across from each other on the couch, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan above us. For a moment, we didn't speak, we just looked at each other, and in her gaze, I saw forgiveness, love, and a longing I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. Finally, she spoke. I wanted you at the wedding, she said softly. I really did. I asked Dad, and he said, well, you weren't coming. He didn't want to talk to me about it. I tried. I cried. I looked for you. I wanted you there. I felt tears stream down my face, and I reached out to hold her hands. Oh, Lily, I whispered. I didn't know. I would have come. I would have done anything to be there for you. She shook her head. No, Grandma, it's not your fault. He made his choice, but I still want you in my life. I still need you. And in that moment, I realized something I had forgotten. Love doesn't disappear, even when others try to bury it. It waits, quietly, for those who are patient enough to reach back. After we talked for a while, Lily left to get some papers from her room. I sat alone in the living room, thinking about Daniel. I knew I couldn't rebuild the bridge with my granddaughter and ignore the source of the hurt. Not yet, not forever. So I picked up my phone and sent him another message. Not angry, not blaming, just honest. Daniel, I know there are things we need to discuss. I want to understand your feelings, and I want us to move forward, for Lily, for us. Please call me when you're ready. And then I waited. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know what he would say, but I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks, because I had taken the first step toward healing, not just for myself, but for the family I loved. It wasn't immediate. Daniel didn't call that night. He didn't call the next day, but a week later he arrived at my door. No fanfare, no apology rehearsed, just my son, standing there, hesitant, vulnerable, and human. Mom, he said quietly, I messed up. I didn't handle things well. I see that now. I looked at him, the man who had once been my little boy, and I took a deep breath. I know, Daniel, and I want us to move forward. I want to be part of Lily's life, and I want us to be part of each other's lives again. He nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders, and for the first time in years, we hugged, not perfectly, not without awkwardness, but enough to begin. From that day on, things slowly changed. Phone calls became more frequent, visits became longer. We shared meals, memories, and even disagreements, but always with respect and love. And Lily, she thrived. Her laughter filled the house again, the same laughter I remembered from when she was a toddler in my lap. I realized then that families aren't perfect. They hurt, they falter, they miscommunicate, but with patience, honesty, and a willingness to forgive, bridges can be rebuilt. I learned that day, the day I was barred from my granddaughter's wedding, the day I cried in my car, the day I thought I had lost them, that even the deepest wounds can lead to understanding, healing, and love. To anyone watching this story, sometimes the hardest moments in our families reveal the strength we never knew we had, and sometimes the people we love most need us to stand firm, speak our truth, and trust that love can survive, even the silence, the hurt, and the misunderstandings. Because families, real families, always find their way back to each other.